Jacob's axe bit deep into the seasoned oak, sending a satisfying crack echoing through the winter-stilled forest. The morning air was cold enough to sting his lungs, his breath coiling in faint wisps as he exhaled. The rhythm of his work was a comfort, the sharp measured sound of steel meeting wood a heartbeat that kept the silence at bay. For Jacob, this was life, simple, predictable, and far removed from the concerns of the wider galaxy. He paused, letting the axe rest against his shoulder as he surveyed his progress. Splintered logs lay scattered around him, their pale faces stark against the snow. Another hour of work, perhaps two, and he would have enough to last through the coming storm. He adjusted the fur-lined cloak draped over his shoulders, its weight a familiar warmth, and turned back toward his cabin. Then he saw them. Tracks. They crossed the snowfield in front of his home, leading from the tree line on the far side of the clearing and stopping just short of the steps to his porch. The prints were massive, far larger than any animal native to the northern frontier. Each one sank deep into the snow, leaving impressions that glistened faintly as if the edges of the tracks had been melted by heat. Jacob felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The forest was no stranger to predators. Wolves, bears, even the occasional wandering wolver had crossed his path in the years he had lived here, but these tracks, they were something else. He crouched beside the nearest print, his gloved fingers hovering just above its edge. There was a strange symmetry to the impressions, a deliberate weight in the way the snow had been compacted. It was almost as if, don't start imagining things, Jacob. He shook his head and straightened, his grip tightening on the axe. The sun was climbing higher now, its pale light spilling through the skeletal trees, but it did little to dispel the unease creeping into his chest. He turned his gaze toward the tree line, scanning the shadows for movement. Nothing, he muttered, though his voice sounded hollow in the stillness. And then he saw her. She emerged from the forest like a fragment of a half-remembered dream, her towering figure gliding through the snow with impossible grace. Her skin shimmered in the sunlight, a pale silver hue that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. Hair like molten starlight cascaded down her back, shifting with an almost liquid quality as she moved. Jacob's first instinct was to raise the axe, though his hands betrayed him by trembling on the haft. The woman, if she could even be called that, paused at the edge of the clearing, her eyes locking onto his. They were a deep, iridescent violet, filled with an intelligence that made Jacob's stomach twist. When she spoke, her voice was low and resonant, carrying across the snow with a clarity that defied the distance between them. "You are Jacob." It wasn't a question. Jacob's mouth went dry. He forced himself to straighten, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman tilted her head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost curious. "I am Nixhala," she said, as if the name alone explained everything, "and you are my wife." For a moment, Jacob simply stared, unable to comprehend the absurdity of her words. His grip tightened on the axe, the weight of it grounding him in the face of this surreal encounter. "You've got the wrong person," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "I don't even know you." Nixhala took a step forward, her movements deliberate and unthreatening, though the sheer presence of her made Jacob take a step back. "The bond does not lie," she said calmly. "It called me across the void. It led me to you." "The what?" Jacob barked, the sharpness in his tone driven more by confusion than anger. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is, but—" "It is no game," Nixhala interrupted. Her gaze softened, though there was an intensity behind it that Jacob couldn't ignore. "I have searched for you through lifetimes, through the vastness of stars. You are bound to me, Jacob, by fate, by the will of the Ancient Ones. You are my wife." The word hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Jacob's mind raced, grasping for any explanation that might make sense of the situation. A dream, perhaps? A hallucination brought on by the cold? But no, the bite of the wind was real, as was the weight of the axe in his hands. Nixhala took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Jacob's instinct screamed at him to run, to retreat into the safety of his cabin and bolt the door. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. It wasn't malice or deception. It was hope. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Jakob's voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper. "Why me?" Nixhala smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. "Because the bond chose you," she said simply. "And the bond is never wrong." Before Jacob could respond, a sound cut through the stillness, a low, thrumming hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. Nixhala's expression shifted instantly, her gaze snapping toward the sky. "They are coming," she said, her voice low and urgent. Jakob followed her gaze, his heart pounding as he searched the heavens for the source of the sound. And then he saw it, a distant flicker of light, far too large and too deliberate to be a star. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice rising with panic. Nixhala turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "There is no time to explain," she said, "but you must trust me." Trust her? A stranger who claimed he was her wife? The absurdity of it all would have been laughable if not for the raw, undeniable conviction in her voice. And then the light in the sky grew brighter, and Jakob felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Something was coming, something that would shatter his quiet, predictable life forever. The hum in the sky deepened, growing louder, until it seemed to vibrate through the marrow of Jakob's bones. He stood frozen in the snow, his breath hitching, as the pinprick of light above swelled into something much larger, a dark, angular shadow that glided through the air like a predator circling its prey. Inside. Now. Nixhala's command cut through the numbing confusion clouding Jakob's mind. Her violet eyes were sharp, every trace of their earlier softness gone, replaced by a focused intensity that left no room for argument. Before he could think to protest, she strode past him, her movements fluid and precise, and reached the porch of his cabin. Jakob followed, his steps sluggish and reluctant, as though the weight of the moment threatened to drag him into the earth. He crossed the threshold, shutting the door behind him with a thud that echoed through the small, rustic space. The cabin was a sanctuary of simplicity. Wooden beams darkened with age, shelves lined with jars of preserves, and a single window that framed the snow-covered clearing like a portrait. Nixhala moved with purpose, scanning the room with a sharp gaze. "Where is your weaponry?" she asked. Jacob blinked, still struggling to make sense of her sudden authority. "Weaponry? I'm a woodcutter, not a soldier." Her lips pressed into a thin line, the only sign of her frustration. "Then we must improvise," she muttered, brushing past him to inspect his tools. She lifted his axe, testing its weight with a practiced hand. "This will suffice for now." "For what?" Jakob's voice rose, tinged with disbelief. "What exactly is happening here? What is that?" He gestured toward the window, where the shadow in the sky had drawn closer, its jagged silhouette cutting against the pale light of the sun. Nixhala hesitated, the brief pause enough to send a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold. "They are hunters," she said finally, her voice low. "From my homeworld. Their task is to eliminate those like me, those who form bonds." The word hung heavy in the air, rekindling the strange claim she had made earlier. Jacob shook his head, his frustration boiling over. Bonds? Wives? Hunters? None of this makes any sense. I'm just a man trying to survive in the middle of nowhere, and now you're telling me I'm being hunted by aliens because of, what? Some cosmic mistake? Nixhala turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It is no mistake, Jacob. The bond is ancient and sacred. It is more than emotion or biology. It is fate, and fate does not err." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small space. "You keep saying that, but it doesn't explain why me. What makes me so special? I've never left this forest, let alone the planet. How could I be part of whatever this is?" Nixhala's gaze softened, though the tension in her posture remained. The bond does not choose based on what you are, she said quietly. It chooses based on what you will become. The words struck something deep within him, an unspoken fear he hadn't known he carried. For years, Jakob had been content with his isolation, with the simplicity of his work and the quiet of the forest. But now, for the first time, he felt the weight of that quiet, the way it had smothered questions he was too afraid to ask. Before he could respond, the cabin shuddered, a deep vibration rippling through the walls. The light outside dimmed as the shadow descended, its edges sharpening into the form of a sleek black vessel. Jakob's pulse quickened as a mechanical hiss sounded, followed by the crunch of snow under heavy footsteps. "They're here," Nixhala said, her voice a low growl. She adjusted her grip on the axe and moved to the window, her gaze narrowing. "Stay behind me." Jakob's instincts screamed at him to run, to flee into the forest and disappear among the trees. But something in Nixhala's presence, a quiet, unyielding certainty, anchored him to the spot. The door exploded inward. Splinters rained down as a figure stepped through the wreckage. It was humanoid, but only barely. Its armor was sleek and segmented, with jagged protrusions that gave it an almost insect-like appearance. Its face was obscured by a dark visor, though the faint hum of machinery suggested something unnatural lurked beneath. The hunter's gaze locked onto Nixhala, and without hesitation, it lunged. Nixhala met the charge head-on, the axe swinging in a wide arc that forced the intruder back. The clash was brutal and swift. Nixhala's movements were a blur of calculated strikes, each one designed to exploit a weakness in her opponent's armor. Jakob watched, transfixed, as the hunter retaliated. Its weapon, a blade that seemed to shimmer with energy, narrowly missing her by inches. "Jakob!" Nixhala's voice snapped him out of his stupor. "The relic. Find it." Relic? Jakob's mind scrambled for context, his thoughts flashing back to the strange object they had unearthed near the cabin just hours ago. He moved instinctively, grabbing the artifact from where it rested on the table. It was small and crystalline, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. As his fingers closed around it, a jolt of energy surged through him. For a moment, the world around him seemed to dim, and he saw flashes of something, images, memories, or perhaps visions of another life. A towering city of silver spires, a star-filled void stretching endlessly, and Nixhala's face, framed by a blazing light. "Jakob!" Nixhala's shout yanked him back to the present. She was pinned against the wall, the hunter's blade inches from her throat. Without thinking, Jakob moved, clutching the relic tightly as he hurled himself at the attacker. The moment the relic made contact with the hunter's armor, a shockwave erupted, sending both Jakob and the intruder sprawling. Nixhala wasted no time, seizing the opportunity to strike. The axe came down with a final resounding crack, and the hunter collapsed in a lifeless heap. The silence that followed was deafening. Jakob lay on the floor, his chest heaving as he stared at the artifact in his hand. It glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Nixhala knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "The bond has awakened," she said softly. Jakob looked at her, his voice trembling. What just happened?" Nixhala's gaze held his, steady and unwavering. "The beginning," she said. "This is only the beginning." The glow of the relic had not faded. Jakob sat on the cabin floor, his fingers trembling as the artifact pulsed gently in his grasp, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to harmonize with the frantic beating of his heart. The crystalline object, no larger than his palm, radiated a warmth that defied the chill of the room. Nixhala knelt across from him, the body of the hunter sprawled in a lifeless heap at her side. The flickering energy of its weapon had died along with it, leaving only the acrid smell of scorched metal in the air. Despite the calm settling over the cabin, Jakob could feel the weight of something monumental pressing down on him. What is this thing?" Jakob finally asked, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and awe. Nixhala's gaze shifted to the relic, her expression unreadable. "It is the core of the bond," she said softly. a fragment of something ancient, older than my people, perhaps older than the stars themselves. It is both anchor and key, Jakob, and now it is awake. Awake? Jakob repeated, his grip tightening on the relic as if it might suddenly spring to life and leap from his hands. What does that even mean, and why does it feel like it's alive? Nixhala reached out, her silver fingers brushing against the artifact with a reverence that sent a shiver through Jakob's spine. The bond is not just a connection between souls, she said. It is a force, a living thread that binds destinies together. When it chose you, it imprinted upon you, and through that imprint, the relic has been activated. Jakob shook his head, his thoughts a swirling chaos. You keep talking about this bond as if it's some kind of cosmic law. But I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for any of this. Nixhala's gaze hardened, though her voice remained calm. The bond does not require your consent, she said. It is not a contract. It is a truth. You can no more escape it than you can escape your own shadow. The weight of her words settled heavily on Jakob, and for a moment, he said nothing. He glanced at the lifeless hunter, its alien form a stark reminder of the danger that had crashed into his quiet life. And what about them? He asked, his voice low. How many more of these hunters are out there? Nixhala's silence was answer enough. The ground beneath them shuddered. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew steadily stronger. Jakob felt his stomach twist as he realized the tremors were not coming from below. They were coming from above. Nixhala sprang to her feet, her every movement precise and deliberate. She snatched Jakob's hand, pulling him to his feet. More will come, she said, her voice sharp with urgency. We cannot stay here. Jakob wrenched his arm free, frustration flaring in his chest. And go where? He demanded. This is my home, my life. I don't even know what's happening, and you expect me to just leave? Nixhala turned to face him, her violet eyes blazing with an intensity that made him take a step back. Your life is no longer your own, she said. The moment the bond awakened, you became a target. Every hunter in the sector will converge here, and they will not stop until you are destroyed. If you wish to survive, you must trust me. Her words stung with a bitter truth Jakob couldn't deny. He glanced out the shattered door, where the shadow of the hunter's ship loomed against the pale sky. In the distance, faint glimmers of light appeared on the horizon. More ships, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like spears. What do we do? Jakob asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Nixhala's expression softened, just enough to reveal the weight of her own fears. We fight, she said simply. Before Jakob could respond, the first ship descended, its engines roaring like a thunderclap. The ground quaked beneath its weight as it landed in the clearing, sending a plume of snow and ice cascading into the air. Nixhala moved swiftly, pulling Jakob toward the back of the cabin. There is a path that leads deeper into the forest, she said. It will buy us time. Jakob hesitated, his eyes darting between the approaching ships and the relic still clutched in his hand. What about this? If they're after it, shouldn't we destroy it? No. Nixhala's voice was sharp, her tone leaving no room for debate. The relic is more than a target. It is your only chance of survival. Jakob wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but the urgency in her voice silenced him. He followed her through the cabin and into the dense woods beyond, the relic's faint glow lighting their way like a phantom lantern. The forest closed around them, its snow-laden branches forming a canopy that muffled the sounds of the ships above. Jakob's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he struggled to keep pace with Nixhala, her movements impossibly swift and sure-footed. They had barely made it 100 yards when a deafening crack split the air. Jakob turned just in time to see a beam of energy slam into the ground behind them, the force of the blast throwing him off his feet. Jakob! Nixhala's voice cut through the ringing in his ears as she helped him to his feet. Keep moving! Another blast struck, this time closer, sending a shower of snow and debris raining down around them. Jakob stumbled, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. The relic pulsed in his hand, its warmth intensifying as if it were responding to the danger. Nixhala's grip on his arm tightened. "The relic is reacting to you," she said, her voice strained. "Focus on it. Let it guide you." Jakob clenched his jaw, his frustration boiling over. "I don't even know what that means." "You will," Nixhala said, her tone firm. "Trust the bond." Jakob closed his eyes, the chaos around him fading as he focused on the relic's rhythm. The warmth spread through him, steady and insistent, and for a brief moment he felt something, a thread of connection, faint but unbreakable. When he opened his eyes, the forest around him seemed sharper, more vivid. He could feel the energy of the hunters closing in, their presence like shadows pressing against the edges of his mind. "They're coming," he said, his voice trembling. Nixhala nodded, a faint smile breaking through her tension. "Then let them come." The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a battlefield. Jakob moved through the snow-draped trees, his breath fogging the air in rapid, uneven bursts. The relic burned against his chest, where he had tucked it beneath his coat, its rhythmic pulse growing stronger with every step. It was as if the object was alive, urging him forward, though he could not say toward what. Nixhala led the way, her towering frame a ghostly figure against the pale light filtering through the branches. Despite her size, she moved with the precision of a predator, every step measured, every turn deliberate. Behind them, the faint hum of the hunters' ships grew louder, a constant reminder that their time was running out. "How much farther?" Jakob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nixhala glanced over her shoulder, her violet eyes catching the light like embers. "Not far," she said. "There is a place ahead where we can make a stand." "A stand?" Jakob's stomach churned at the thought. "You mean fight?" She didn't answer immediately, and when she did, her tone was heavy. "If we must." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jakob wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but deep down, he knew there wasn't one. The hunters were relentless, their ships cutting through the sky with predatory intent. Running was a delaying tactic at best. As they pressed on, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying with it a faint hum that resonated in Jakob's chest. He realized with a start that the hum was not external. It was coming from the relic. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. Nixhala slowed, her gaze sweeping the area with a reverence that was almost palpable. "This is where the bond first began," she said. "Long before my people knew the stars, this place was a nexus, a convergence of forces beyond comprehension. The relic is drawn to it, because it is part of its origin." Jakob frowned, glancing around at the ancient trees and snow-covered ground. "This forest? Here on Earth?" Nixhala shook her head. "Not Earth as you know it. This land has changed over millennia, but echoes of the nexus remain. It is why you were chosen, Jakob. The bond sought a soul that resonated with its origin, and it found you here." Jakob stared at her, his mind reeling. "So, what? I'm just some kind of cosmic accident? A lucky draw?" Nixhala stepped closer, her expression softening. "You are not an accident," she said. "The bond does not choose lightly. It saw something in you, a strength, a potential you have yet to realize." Jakob opened his mouth to argue, to deny any such potential, but the words died in his throat. Deep down, he felt it too, a flicker of something he couldn't name. Before he could dwell on it, the hum in the air shifted. It grew louder, sharper, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. "They're here," Nixhala said, her voice low. Jakob turned, his heart pounding as the first of the hunters emerged from the trees. It was smaller than the one they had faced earlier, but no less menacing. Its armor gleamed black as obsidian, and its weapon, a serrated staff crackling with energy, radiated a cold, deadly light. Behind it, more figures appeared, their movements fluid and unrelenting. They fanned out, surrounding Jakob and Nixhala in a tightening circle. "Stay behind me," Nixhala said, raising her axe. Jakob obeyed, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He clutched the relic tightly, its heat searing into his skin. The hunters didn't speak, didn't pause. They moved as one, closing in with precision. Nixhala struck first. Her axe arced through the air with lethal grace, meeting the nearest hunter's staff in a shower of sparks. The clash echoed through the forest, a violent symphony of metal and energy. Jakob's chest tightened as he watched her fight. Nixhala was a blur of strength and skill, her every movement calculated to exploit the hunter's weaknesses. But they were relentless, their numbers pressing in like a tide. A flash of light drew Jakob's attention, and he turned just in time to see a hunter break through the fray, its weapon raised. He stumbled back, his heart racing as the relic's pulse quickened. Without thinking, he raised it, the crystalline object catching the light in a dazzling display. The hunter hesitated. Jakob felt the relic's warmth surge, spreading through his arm and into his chest. For a moment, time seemed to slow. He saw the hunter's hesitation, felt the bond between himself and the relic flare to life, and in that instant he understood. The relic was not just a tool, it was a weapon. Jakob raised it higher, focusing on the pulse, the rhythm, the energy built within him, a crescendo that demanded release. He let it go. A burst of light erupted from the relic, striking the hunter square in the chest. The force sent it flying, its armor cracking as it hit the ground with a heavy thud. Jakob stared at the relic in awe, its glow fading back to a soft pulse. "Jakob!" Nixhala's voice pulled him back to the moment. She was fighting off two hunters, her movements slower, her breaths labored. "Focus! The bond is with you. Use it!" Jakob nodded, gripping the relic tightly. He stepped forward, the warmth spreading through him again. The hunters turned their attention to him, their visors reflecting the artifact's glow. As they charged, Jakob felt the bond surge, a flood of power that connected him to something vast and ancient. He moved without thinking, the relic guiding his steps. Light and energy erupted with each strike, pushing the hunters back, breaking their formation. The battle was chaos, but Jakob felt a strange clarity, as if the relic was showing him a path through the storm. Together, he and Nixhala fought, their movements synchronized in a way that felt almost effortless. When the final hunter fell, the forest fell silent. Jakob collapsed to his knees, the relic still warm in his grasp. Nixhala knelt beside him, her breathing heavy but steady. "You did well," she said, her voice soft. Jakob looked at her, his chest heaving. "I don't even know what I did." Nixhala smiled faintly. "You listened. That is enough." As the adrenaline faded, Jakob felt the weight of what they had done settle over him. The hunters were defeated, but he knew it wasn't over. The bond was awake, and the relic had revealed its power. But at what cost? He glanced at Nixhala, her gaze distant as she stared into the forest. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps even fear. "What happens now?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet, almost mournful. "Now, the real war begins." The morning dawned heavy and silent, the forest cloaked in a veil of mist that softened the edges of the world. Jakob stood at the edge of the clearing, his breath curling in pale tendrils before fading into the cold air. The relic hung from a leather cord around his neck, its once blazing light now reduced to a faint, steady glow, a heartbeat that matched his own. Behind him, the aftermath of the battle lay strewn across the frozen ground. The remains of the hunters' weapons glinted dully in the weak sunlight, their bodies dissolved into ash and vapor long before dawn. The forest seemed to sigh with relief, its branches swaying gently in a breeze that carried no sound of pursuit. Nixhala emerged from the shadows, her silver skin marked with streaks of soot and blood. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, her stride was strong, her presence unwavering. She came to stand beside Jakob, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They won't return," she said, her voice low but certain. "Not after what you've done." Jakob frowned, his fingers brushing against the relic. "What we've done," he corrected. Nixhala inclined her head, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Perhaps. But it was your bond with the relic that turned the tide. Without you, this fight would have ended very differently." He looked down at the glowing crystal, its warmth a constant reminder of the power it had unleashed. The memory of the battle was still vivid in his mind, the hunters falling before him, the energy coursing through his veins, the sensation of being connected to something vast and incomprehensible. "It doesn't feel like a victory," he admitted, his voice heavy. Nixhala studied him for a moment, her gaze unreadable. "Victory rarely does," she said, "but it is not the battle that matters. It is what comes after." Jakob turned to face her, his brow furrowing. "And what comes after? More hunters? More running?" Nixhala's expression softened, and for the first time Jakob saw a glimmer of vulnerability in her eyes. "The hunters will not stop," she said. "Not as long as the bond exists, but you have proven that you can wield its power, and that changes everything. The relic is no longer just a target, it is a weapon, a shield, and so are you." The weight of her words settled heavily on Jakob's shoulders. He had spent his entire life avoiding conflict, carving out a quiet existence in the forest where the world's chaos couldn't reach him. Now, that life felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the reality of the bond and all it entailed. "What if I don't want this?" he asked, his voice raw. Nixhala placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but not unkind. "The bond does not ask what you want," she said. "It simply is. But what you choose to do with it, that is yours alone." Jakob closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He thought of the life he had left behind, the cabin, the axe, the steady rhythm of days spent in quiet solitude. That life was gone, shattered by the arrival of a towering alien woman with violet eyes and a claim he still struggled to understand. And yet, as he stood there, the relic pulsing against his skin, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The bond had chosen him, and though he had resisted, fought against it with every fiber of his being, he could no longer deny the truth. This was his path now, whether he wanted it or not. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "I'll fight, but only if you promise me one thing." Nixhala tilted her head, her expression curious. "And what is that?" Jakob met her gaze, his eyes fierce. "That when this is over, when the hunters are gone and the bond is safe, you'll help me find a way back to the life I lost." Nixhala's smile was faint, but genuine. "If that is what you desire, I will do everything in my power to help you find it." Jakob nodded, the tension in his chest easing slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Together, they turned to face the forest, its shadows stretching long and dark in the early light. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and questions that had no easy answers. But for the first time, Jakob felt something other than fear or doubt. He felt resolve. As they began to move, the relic pulsed again, its rhythm steady and strong. Jakob didn't understand it, not fully, but he no longer needed to. The bond was part of him now, as inescapable as the beating of his heart. And though the road ahead was long, he knew he would walk it. One step, one breath, one pulse at a time. Pulse. The twin moons of Epsilon 9 hung low in the bruised sky, their pale light spilling over the jagged remains of a world long abandoned by its masters. The wind stirred the brittle soil in restless eddies, whispering through the skeletons of machinery left to rot in the fields. Gregory Tate stood in the glow of his dim flood lamp, hands steady as they worked the stubborn hydropump lodged deep in the parched ground. The old engineer's knees ached as he knelt, but he ignored the protests of his body. The silence of the plain suited him. It had been years since he'd left Earth, voluntarily, though he rarely admitted it aloud. The war he'd escaped was long over now, a scorched chapter in humanity's endless cycles of ambition and destruction. Here, on this desolate rock, life was simple, predictable. He liked it that way. Until tonight. A flicker on the horizon caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the moonlight, the way shadows danced across the broken terrain. But as he squinted, he saw it again, a faint, wavering shape moving through the dust. His pulse quickened, though he couldn't say why. Epsilon 9 didn't get visitors. Not here, on the edges of nowhere. Gregory rose slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. He considered heading inside and locking the door, but the shadow grew larger, more distinct. It stumbled, then collapsed in a heap just beyond the glow of his flood lamp. "Damn it," Gregory muttered under his breath. He reached for the old plasma torch he kept strapped to his work belt. Not much good against anything serious, but it felt better than going unarmed. Cautiously, he stepped into the pale light, boots crunching over dry soil. The figure was humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways. The limbs were too long, the curve of the shoulders too elegant for a human frame. Torn fabric clung to a body shimmering faintly, as though it reflected the moonlight directly. Gregory crouched down, his breath catching as he got a closer look. A woman, at least she appeared to be female. Her skin gleamed like polished metal, shifting through shades of silver and gold as the light struck her. Her hair, a cascade of translucent strands, clung to her face, matted with what he could only assume was blood. But the most unsettling feature was her eyes. Luminous pools of white, as if stars burned where her pupils should have been. Her lips parted, and she spoke, a soft, melodic language that rolled over him like music. It wasn't anything he recognized, and yet something about the tone made him feel as though he should understand it. Her voice wavered, desperate, and her fingers clutched at the air between them. "Whoa, easy," Gregory said, raising his free hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I don't speak, whatever that is. Can you—" The woman's head lolled, her strength fading fast. A low groan escaped her lips, and she slumped further into the dust. Gregory cursed again, louder this time, and dropped the torch. He hadn't invited trouble into his life in years, but trouble had a way of finding him, even in exile. With a grunt of effort, he hefted her slender form into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, her body unnervingly cool to the touch. As he carried her toward the Hydra Farm's main building, questions clawed at the edges of his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she collapsed on his land, of all places? The old engineer's dwelling was as utilitarian as its occupant. The single-room structure was crammed with salvaged parts, tools, and half-finished projects. A cot sat tucked into the corner, a concession to Gregory's occasional need for rest. He laid the woman on it carefully, his mind racing as he reached for his medkit. Her wounds were strange. Jagged, glowing lines crisscrossed her arms and torso, as if her very skin had been torn open by some unnatural force. Gregory worked in silence, disinfecting the cuts and applying synth bandages. The bandages pulsed faintly as they adhered to her skin, fusing with a hiss of steam. The woman stirred but didn't wake. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling in irregular intervals. Gregory leaned back, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "What in the hell are you?" he murmured. As if in response, the flood lamp outside flickered and dimmed. Gregory froze, his gaze snapping to the window. The wind outside had picked up, but this wasn't the usual gusting breeze. It howled, a deep and guttural sound that rattled the walls of the building. He glanced at the woman, then at the door. Something was out there. Something bigger than wind. Grabbing the plasma torch, Gregory stepped to the threshold and peered into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but swirling dust. But then, faint lights emerged in the distance, red pinpricks moving in formation. His blood ran cold. Patrol drones. They weren't supposed to come this far out. Epsilon 9 was officially uninhabited, a wasteland not worth the resources to monitor. Yet here they were, methodically sweeping the plains in a grid pattern, their harsh beams cutting through the night, and they were heading straight for his farm. Gregory's grip on the torch tightened. He knew better than to think their appearance was a coincidence. His uninvited guest was trouble, all right, the kind that came with powerful enemies. The drones drew closer, their metallic hum growing louder. Gregory backed into the room, his mind working furiously. He glanced at the woman on the cot. Whatever she was, whatever she'd done, she'd brought this down on both of them. For the first time in years, Gregory felt the old instincts kicking in, the part of him that had once solved problems too big for ordinary men. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but one thing was certain. If those drones found her, they wouldn't leave witnesses. The patrol drones moved with a precision that set Gregory's teeth on edge. Their angular frames, black as obsidian, glided across the plains in synchronized arcs. Beams of light sliced through the swirling dust, brushing against the edges of his hydrofarm before retreating. Gregory stood at the window, his breath shallow, the old plasma torch gripped tightly in his hand. "What the hell have you gotten me into?" he muttered, glancing at the unconscious woman sprawled on his cot. Her breathing was steadier now, though faint. The faint metallic sheen of her skin caught the light of the dim lamp, casting shimmering reflections across the room. Gregory's eyes lingered on her face, alien yet oddly human in its contours. She looked fragile, like glass barely holding together under unseen pressure. Outside, the drones fanned out, their movements deliberate. Gregory knew their type, model CRX-7s, designed for reconnaissance and light enforcement. Not the most heavily armed machines, but more than capable of dealing with an old man and his rusting farm. He'd seen drones like these during the final years of Earth's wars, deployed to crush resistance in the sprawling urban wastelands. They were cold, efficient, and programmed to leave nothing of value standing. A sudden crackle from his comm panel jolted him. Static hissed through the speakers, followed by a low, modulated voice. "This is CRX Division Command. Unauthorized life form detected in Sector 23. All civilians are to remain in their dwellings. Non-compliance will be met with force." Gregory's fingers tightened around the edge of the panel. Unauthorized life form. They weren't here for him. They were here for her. His gaze shifted back to the cot. Her wounds still glowed faintly beneath the synth bandages, pulsing like embers waiting to ignite. Whatever she wasn't just a passerby, and whatever she carried, it was important enough to bring the drones out of their usual patrol routes. Gregory swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could turn her over, let the drones take her, and hope they'd leave him and his farm intact. It was the logical choice, the safe choice, but the thought left a sour taste in his mouth. The window vibrated as a drone passed closer, its beam lingering on the edge of the building. Gregory ducked back, heart hammering. The drones weren't scanning randomly anymore. They were closing in. "Wake up," he hissed, moving to the cot and shaking the woman's shoulder. Her skin was still unnaturally cool to the touch, and her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Come on. I need you awake now." She stirred, her lips parting as a faint sound escaped. A word, or perhaps a name. Her voice was musical, though fractured, like a melody played on a broken instrument. Gregory shook her again, harder this time. "If you don't wake up, we're both dead." Her eyes snapped open, and Gregory stumbled back. Those luminous white orbs locked onto his, piercing and unearthly. For a moment she said nothing, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for something. Then her body tensed, and she sat up abruptly, wincing as pain rippled through her. "Where?" Her voice was strained, the word barely audible. "You're in my home," Gregory said, keeping his voice low. "Don't ask questions right now. We don't have time. Those drones outside, they're looking for you." Her expression shifted, and something like fear flickered across her face. She pressed a hand to her side, feeling the bandages, and then turned her gaze back to Gregory. "You helped me?" Gregory snorted. "Don't thank me yet. I might regret it before the night's over." Outside, the hum of the drones grew louder. Gregory moved to the window and peered out. The red lights were closer now, weaving through the debris-strewn landscape with unsettling precision. "We need to move," he said, turning back to her. "Do you understand me? They're not going to knock politely." She nodded, though her movements were sluggish. Swinging her legs over the side of the cot, she tried to stand, but wavered, nearly collapsing again. Gregory caught her muttering under his breath. "Figures. You've got all this fancy alien tech in you, but you can't walk straight." "Alien?" she repeated, her voice soft, almost questioning. Gregory blinked at her, confused. "What else would you call yourself?" For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she shook her head, as if dismissing the thought. "We can't let them find me. If they do, they'll kill you too." "Well, that's comforting," Gregory muttered, helping her toward the back of the room. The hydrofarm's underground storage area was a cramped, dimly lit space, filled with old tools and supplies Gregory hadn't touched in years. He guided her down the narrow staircase, wincing as his knees protested the movement. The woman leaned heavily on him, her breathing labored but steady. "They'll scan for heat signatures," she said suddenly, her voice stronger now, "and movement. If we stay here, they'll find us." "Not if I shut down the farm systems first," Gregory replied. He set her down gently on an old crate and moved to the control panel mounted on the wall. His fingers flew over the outdated keypad, deactivating the hydro pumps and powering down the lamps above. The hum of the machinery faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The woman watched him, her gaze intense. "You know machines well. I was an engineer once, before all this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the desolate world around them. "Good," she said, her tone firm despite her exhaustion. "Because we'll need that." Gregory turned to face her, frowning. "What do you mean, we? I don't even know who you are, or why you're here." Her luminous eyes met his, unflinching. "My name is Gyria, and if I told you everything, you wouldn't believe me." Gregory opened his mouth to reply, but a metallic clang from above cut him off. The drones were here. The clang echoed down the narrow staircase, each reverberation tightening Gregory's chest. Gyria stiffened, her silver-gold skin flickering faintly as her body tensed. The sound wasn't just a sign of intrusion. It was a declaration. The drones had found them. Gregory crouched by the door, his plasma torch humming softly in his grip. The old tool might take out one drone if he hit the power cord directly, but against an entire squad? The odds were laughable. "Stay here," he whispered, though his voice betrayed his nerves. Gyria's luminous eyes locked onto him. "You can't fight them." "Wasn't planning on it," he replied, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was planning. He edged up the stairs, each step deliberate, his pulse a steady drumbeat in his ears. The room above was shrouded in darkness now that the hydrofarm systems were offline. The air felt heavier, charged with tension. Gregory pressed his back against the wall, peering through the narrow gap of the partially open door. The first drone hovered just beyond the threshold, its red optics scanning the interior. Its movements were precise, deliberate, the faint whir of its propulsion systems barely audible. Behind it, more drones waited in formation, their lights cutting through the swirling dust. Gregory's mind raced. He needed a distraction, something to draw them away from the storage entrance. His gaze fell on a rusted toolbox near the stairs. It wasn't much, but it might buy them a few seconds. Gripping the edge of the door, he flung the toolbox toward the far end of the room. The metal clattered against the floor, and the nearest drone spun sharply, its light pivoting to illuminate the noise. "Heat signature detected," a synthetic voice announced, cold and emotionless. Gregory's stomach dropped. The distraction wasn't enough. They knew he was here. Before the drone could advance, a faint hum filled the air. It started low, like a distant vibration, but quickly grew in intensity. Gregory froze, his hand tightening on the plasma torch. The drone faltered, its movements jerky, as though something unseen were interfering with its systems. Sparks erupted from its chassis, and the red optic flickered before dimming entirely. "What the?" Gregory muttered, his eyes widening as the drone crumpled to the ground. The hum intensified, resonating through the walls of the hydro farm. One by one, the other drones began to twitch, their lights stuttering. Some spun in erratic circles, while others simply collapsed, lifeless. Gregory backed away, his heart pounding. Whatever was happening, it wasn't his doing. Behind him, the door to the storage area creaked open. Jeria stood in the dim light, her posture unsteady but purposeful. Her eyes glowed brighter than before, and her hands were raised, trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" Gregory asked, his voice hoarse. Jeria didn't answer. Her focus was entirely on the drones, her expression a mix of concentration and strain. The hum seemed to emanate from her, a pulsing frequency that resonated in Gregory's chest. The last drone let out a shrill, garbled screech before it collapsed. The hum faded, leaving the room in silence once more. Jeria swayed, catching herself on the wall. Gregory rushed to her side, his mind racing with questions. "That was you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded weakly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I disrupted their neural links. It won't last. More will come." Gregory stared at the lifeless drones scattered across the floor. "You didn't think to mention you could do that earlier?" "It's not something I can sustain," she admitted. "It's dangerous. For me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Gregory helped her back down the stairs, his grip firm as she leaned against him. Back in the storage area, Jeria slumped onto the crate, her body visibly trembling. Gregory paced in front of her, the questions tumbling out before he could stop himself. "What the hell was that? How did you do it? And why do those drones care so much about you in the first place?" Jeria hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I told you, Gregory. If I explained everything, you wouldn't believe me." "Try me." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, a sound that carried the weight of centuries. "My people, the Ziller, were not just another species," she began, her voice soft but steady. "We were creators, innovators. Our mastery over biology and technology was unmatched. We built worlds, healed dying stars, and shaped the very fabric of life itself." Gregory blinked. "You're saying you were gods?" "No," she replied, her tone sharp. "We were not gods, but we were caretakers." For a time she paused, her gaze distant. Then came the war, a conflict we didn't start, but one that consumed us nonetheless. Entire generations were lost, and with them, the knowledge we had spent millennia cultivating. Gregory crossed his arms, his skepticism warring with curiosity. "And what does any of this have to do with you showing up here, half dead with drones on your tail?" Jeria's expression hardened. "I carry the last fragments of our knowledge, the blueprints of what we were, and what we could be again." Gregory's breath hitched. "You mean, in your body?" She nodded. "Encoded in my DNA, layered into my neural pathways. I am the last archive of the Ziller. If I'm destroyed, everything we were, all of our potential, will vanish with me." The weight of her words settled over Gregory like a lead blanket. He'd spent most of his life around machines, understanding their logic, their purpose. But this was something far beyond anything he'd encountered. "And those drones?" he asked. "They belong to those who destroyed us," Jeria said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They've hunted me across systems, determined to erase every trace of the Ziller." Gregory exhaled slowly, the enormity of the situation sinking in. He was no hero, no soldier. He was an old man trying to live out his days in peace, but peace wasn't an option anymore. The hum returned, faint and distant, like a warning bell in the night. Jairia's eyes widened. "They've sent more," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gregory tightened his grip on the plasma torch. Then we'd better figure out what comes next. The night pressed against the Hydra farm like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Gregory's breath fogged the cool air in the storage chamber, though sweat slicked his palms as he gripped the plasma torch. It wasn't much against what was coming, but it was all he had. Jaria sat on the floor, cross-legged and unnervingly still. Her eyes were closed, her glowing lids masking the unsettling radiance of her gaze. Though her body appeared serene, Gregory could feel the energy radiating from her, an almost imperceptible hum that seemed to synchronize with the faint vibrations in the walls. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "Preparing," she said without opening her eyes. "For what? You've already said you can't sustain whatever it is you did before." Jaria's lips twitched into a faint smile, humorless and strained. "There are other ways to fight, Gregory. Ways you won't like." His frown deepened. "You need to start giving me straight answers, lady. I'm not just a passenger in this nightmare anymore." Her eyes opened, and the light of them caught him off guard, stark against the dimness of the room. "You've never been a passenger," she said simply. "From the moment you found me, you were part of this." Above, the hum of approaching drones grew louder. Gregory's hydro farm was under siege, and the tension twisted tighter in his chest. His sanctuary, his solitude, his life was disintegrating piece by piece. "I need you to trust me," Jaria said, rising to her feet. She swayed for a moment before steadying herself against the wall. "Trust you?" Gregory barked a bitter laugh. "You've given me nothing but riddles since you got here. Trust is a bit much to ask, don't you think?" Her expression hardened, and for the first time Gregory caught a glimpse of something deeply alien in her features, something unyielding, almost ancient. "I carry the last chance for my people's survival," she said. "But survival comes at a cost, and that cost may fall on you." Gregory's jaw tightened. "What kind of cost?" She hesitated, and in that moment, the hum outside surged, followed by a sharp mechanical screech. Gregory's grip on the plasma torch tightened instinctively. "Jaria," he pressed, his voice rough with urgency. "What aren't you telling me?" And the door to the storage chamber shuddered as something struck it from the other side. Gregory spun toward the sound, his heart hammering. The drones were here, and they weren't waiting for an invitation. Jaria stepped forward, her movements deliberate but strained. "The knowledge I carry, it's not just information. It's a living archive intertwined with my mind, my body, my very essence. To unlock its full potential, it must bond with another." Gregory stared at her, his mind scrambling to process her words. "What does that mean? Bond how?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she almost looked human, vulnerable. "The archive will reshape you," she said. "It will rewrite your DNA, your neural pathways. You'll become something more. But you won't be the same." Gregory staggered back a step, the weight of her words crashing down on him. "You're saying I'd stop being me?" Jaria nodded. "You would change. Your memories, your consciousness, they might survive, or they might not. It's not a process I can control." "That's not a choice," Gregory snapped, his voice rising. "That's suicide." The door shuddered again, the metal buckling slightly under the force. Sparks flew as the drones began to cut through the reinforced panel. Jaria turned to face him fully, her expression resolute. "If we don't do this, the archive will be destroyed. My people's legacy, their future, everything will vanish." Gregory's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to find another way. But there was no time, no alternatives. The drones were nearly through, and once they breached the door, there'd be no stopping them. He looked at Jaria, his chest tight with anger, fear, and something he couldn't quite name. "You're asking me to give up everything, my life, my identity, for a people I don't even know." "I'm asking you to choose," she said softly. The door gave way with a deafening screech, and the first drone surged into the room, its optics blazing. Gregory raised the plasma torch, but before he could act, Jaria stepped between him and the advancing machine. The hum returned, louder this time, resonating through the chamber like a living thing. Jaria's body glowed with an intensity that forced Gregory to shield his eyes. The drone faltered, its movements erratic, but this time the strain was evident on Jaria. Her limbs trembled, and her breathing grew ragged. "It's now or never, Gregory," she said, her voice strained but unwavering. "If I fall, they'll kill you too." Gregory's grip on the plasma torch loosened, and his mind spun with indecision. Everything in him screamed against what she was asking. He wasn't a hero, wasn't a savior. He was an old man clinging to the remnants of a life he barely recognized anymore. But as he looked at Jaria, her body alight with otherworldly power, her face a mask of determination, something shifted inside him. She wasn't just fighting for her people. She was fighting for hope, for survival, for the chance to prove that even in the face of extinction, something could endure. Gregory exhaled sharply, his decision made. "What do I have to do?" Jaria's eyes met his, and for the first time there was gratitude in her gaze. "Take my hand." He hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, his hand closing over hers. The hum intensified, and a blinding light engulfed the room. Pain lanced through Gregory's body, sharp and unrelenting, as if every cell was being torn apart and reassembled. He gasped, his vision swimming, but he held on, his grip on Jaria's hand unyielding. Through the haze of pain, he heard her voice, calm, steady, and filled with something he hadn't expected. "Thank you, Gregory." And then, the world went dark. The first sensation Gregory became aware of was the pulse. It wasn't his heartbeat, at least not in the way he remembered it, but a steady, rhythmic cadence that resonated through his entire being. It was as though the universe itself had synchronized to this new alien tempo. The second sensation was the air. Crisp, electric, and layered with scents he couldn't name but instinctively understood. Each breath carried meaning, a story of minerals, moisture, and life swirling in the atmosphere. When he opened his eyes, the world around him had shifted. The Hydra farm was unrecognizable, though the walls still bore the scars of the drone assault. Where there had once been darkness, a faint, iridescent glow now emanated from the surfaces, as if the structure itself had awakened. The hum he'd heard so often was now a symphony, a network of sounds weaving together in harmony. Gregory pushed himself to his feet, or rather, what remained of himself. His hands, once calloused and worn from decades of manual labor, shimmered faintly, the skin bearing intricate patterns of light. The ache in his joints was gone, replaced by a fluid strength that felt both alien and natural. "Jaria," he called out, his voice deeper, resonant and unfamiliar. From the shadows, she emerged. Her glow was dimmer now, her movements slower, but her presence was no less commanding. A faint smile curved her lips as she approached him. "You survived," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "I don't feel like me," Gregory replied, glancing down at his transformed form. Jaria nodded. "You're not who you were, but you're more than you thought you could be." He frowned, her words raising a dozen questions. What did I become?" She gestured for him to follow, leading him toward the remnants of the drones scattered across the floor. Their once dead optics now pulsed faintly, as if waiting for a signal. "You are the Nexus," Jaria said as she knelt beside one of the lifeless machines. "A bridge between my people and yours. The archive within me has merged with you, Gregory. Through you, the knowledge of the Zillir will endure. You've become something neither fully human nor fully Zillir, but something uniquely both." Gregory took a step back, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. "And what does that mean for me? My mind, my memories, are they still mine?" Jairia met his gaze, her expression solemn. They are, but you've been augmented. The Zillir were more than their physical forms. They were connected, a living network of shared knowledge and purpose. That connection is now part of you. The implications were staggering. Gregory could feel it. Threads of thought, distant but present, brushing against his consciousness. He wasn't alone anymore, and yet he wasn't entirely sure who or what he was. Is this why they were hunting you? He asked, motioning toward the destroyed drones. Jairia's glow dimmed further, a flicker of sadness crossing her features. Yes. The knowledge I carried, the ability to create, to heal, to transcend, it threatened those who sought dominion through destruction. If I had fallen, the last spark of the Zillir would have been extinguished. And now? Gregory pressed. Her smile returned, faint but resolute. Now they will never extinguish us. The distant hum of engines reached them, a low rumble that sent a shiver through the walls. Gregory's enhanced senses picked up on it immediately, a fleet, larger than any he'd encountered before, closing in on their location. They're coming, he said, the certainty in his voice unshakable. Jairia nodded, rising to her feet with visible effort. They'll keep coming, Gregory, but you're not defenseless anymore. As if in response to her words, Gregory felt a surge of energy ripple through him. His vision sharpened, extending beyond the physical boundaries of the hydro farm. He could see the approaching fleet, their sleek ships cutting through the atmosphere like blades. He could feel the pulse of their weapons, the cold precision of their programming. But more than that, he could feel the hydro farm itself, a living extension of his newfound connection. The walls hummed with latent energy, waiting for him to act. This place, he murmured, his gaze sweeping the glowing chamber. It's alive. It's attuned to you, Jairia corrected. You've unlocked its potential, just as it has unlocked yours. Gregory clenched his fists, the light patterns on his skin flaring brightly. So, what do we do? Jairia stepped closer, her glow flickering like a dying ember. We fight. But this time, we fight with the knowledge that we're no longer alone. And the battle that followed was unlike anything Gregory had ever imagined. The drones swarmed the hydro farm, their precision and numbers overwhelming. But Gregory was no longer the frail man he had once been. With each wave of attackers, the hydro farm responded to his commands, its walls shifting and reshaping to repel the invaders. Energy pulses erupted from the glowing surfaces, dismantling drones mid-flight. Gregory moved through the chaos with a clarity that felt almost instinctual, his every motion guided by the nexus within him. Jairia stood beside him, her strength fading but her resolve unwavering. Together, they held the line, their combined efforts a testament to what could be achieved when two worlds converged. When the last drone fell, the silence was deafening. Gregory stood amidst the wreckage, his breathing steady despite the exertion. The hydrofarm had sustained damage, but its glow remained steadfast, a beacon of resilience in the face of annihilation. Jairia leaned against a wall, her glow nearly extinguished. Gregory rushed to her side, concern etched across his transformed features. "You need to rest," he said, his voice softer now. She shook her head weakly. "My part is done, Gregory. The future is yours now." "No," he said firmly, his hand closing over hers. "We did this together, and we'll keep doing it together." A faint smile touched her lips. Stubborn as ever. As the sun rose over the desolate horizon, Gregory stood at the threshold of the hydro farm, his gaze fixed on the distant sky. He could feel the hum of the nexus within him, a constant reminder of the path he'd chosen. Jairia's words echoed in his mind. "The future is yours now." And for the first time in years, Gregory felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope.